Hi, welcome to asunnybooknook. Today I'm talking about the TV show Arcane. This is a Netflix original exclusive animated show, and there are 2 seasons, and it's only 2 seasons. And it's also a League of Legends, which is a video game spin-off. Like, it's based on the video game characters and the storylines from the video game. And as a viewer myself, I have zero interest in video games, like, in general, and I have no idea about any of the League of Legends lore like, whatsoever. So that's going to be my perspective in talking about the show in this video. I'm just talking about the show itself. And I'm talking about it from the perspective of a lesbian and Marxist, because I think that it really falls short in its delivery of a lesbian storyline and a potentially revolutionary plot line. It really capitulates to and really aligns with the ideas that, for example, like Mark Fisher puts forth in his book Capitalist Realism, where he contends that, I'm summarizing the thesis generally, but Hollywood productions and films and television shows that address issues like class and revolution are almost certainly always going to be counter-revolutionary due to the nature of the Hollywood machinery itself and the way that viewers can interpret or understand texts and films for what they are, and the actual mechanisms and medium of the production of these stories will always constitute, even when it seems like a sort of class conscious or a potentially class conscious way of being able to read something, like, it's not gonna be that. It's a very pessimistic view of looking at media, but I think it's quite accurate, especially in looking at how this show, I think, really changed between season 1 and season 2. In season 1, which was released in 2021, I first watched it because I went over to my friend's apartment and they were like, Sunny, like, I've watched the first 3 episodes of this new show and, like, it's so good, we need to watch it together. And then we, like, binged the whole thing in one night, and, like, I could not stop thinking about it for months. And the thing is that my love for the show from that first season, it remains in me, like, it's something that I still really consider when thinking about the show, because I think season 2 was ultimately such a disappointment for me. It took me months and months to finally watch the whole season, because in the first couple episodes of season 2 I was, like, getting the gist of things, and I was like, I'm not really loving where this is going. And then I did not love where the rest of it went, because I think that there are so many elements of season 1 that season 2 really abandons in favor of, I think, building a larger universe that the showrunners or that the, like, Riot Games, and the studios who produced and made Arcane can, go on and do spin-offs and stuff of. And it's, like, such a disappointment because it really abandons a lot of the themes and the storylines. And I think from a lesbian representation point of view, a lot of people have pointed out, and it's very obvious that Violet being one of our main characters and one of the perspectives that we follow most primarily, but especially in season 1, we follow her a lot. Her experience being a girl and a butch from the Undercity, from Zaun, is crucial to the way that she moves about the world and how she interacts with other people. She's a fighter and she's very strong, and it's conveyed in so many ways. Physically, she, like, we see her in her fight scenes, we see the way that she confronts power and antagonistic forces in her life. She has a real sense of justice and fury in season 1. Season 1 can be broken down into a pretty, I think, easily digestible, like, 3-act structure, where we get introduced to these characters and where they are in their lives, and we get introduced to the world of Piltover and Zaun. Piltover being the city that exists in the light, and with this innovation and, like, a sort of liberal oligarchy or somewhat of a democracy. Like, there are representatives of, I think, different segments of the Piltover population within this council of the rulers of Piltover. And then there's Zaun, which is the Undercity. It exists in darkness. It is literally below Piltover, and it experiences a level of poverty and oppression that is a direct result of Piltover's rule over Zaun. So first season really presents this reality to us. Also, the fucking lawn mowing happening outside, I'm so sorry. Just to give you a breakdown of like what I think the show is about, or like what the themes as delineated through the plot and the characters from season 1 is. This is my perspective. I think season 1 follows like in the 3-act structure this arc. First act shows us the competing figures of power. These two different men in Zaun who have opposing views of how to deal with Piltover. Vance, who is Vi and Vi's younger sister, Powder / Jinx. Vance is their father, and they also have a few brothers. I think it's 2 brothers, 3 brothers. I haven't rewatched season 1 in a while, but they also have other siblings. And Vance is like a jolly looking, almost like Santa Claus looking guy, and he owns this bar in Zaun, and his way of dealing with Piltover involves sort of, you know, like having an underhanded deal or like a two-way street with Piltover and enforcers, which are the cops of Piltover. He's a collaborator, right? He's a collaborator with Piltover, whereas Silco, who is his rival, they used to be best buddies, but they, I think, ultimately diverged after it led to them like fighting to the death. Silco's perspective is one where he kind of wants to fight for an independent Zaun. So Silco has this sort of political ambition that is also involved with running different like gangs within the Undercity. And Vance has a more like clean family guy approach to things. They both like fall short of being leaders in Zaun because there are so many issues within Zaun that like cannot be just solved by like a single person having some level of power. So we get introduced to that in Act 1 of Season 1, so within the first 3 episodes. And then we see the tragedy of Jinx or Powder, who then becomes Jinx, Powder and Vi being the only survivors of an attack between Vance and, I hope I'm getting his name right. Is his name Vance? Not me forgetting. I'm not good with character names. Y'all know this if you've been around here. Yeah, so Silco and Vance, like, they fight it out, and Vance's whole family dies, except for Powder and Violet. And the thing is that Powder sort of accidentally instigated the death of her family through some of her mechanisms. So from a young age, and as the baby sister of the family, she is very often like overlooked and seen as like there are moments where Vi dismisses her as like, oh, you ruin everything, you know, things that like older siblings will say to younger siblings when they fuck shit up. And she ends up developing a sense of self around being a fuck up, and then in the ashes of her family dying and Violet disappearing, because Violet gets hauled off by enforcers as like a young teenager, and you know, Powder is still very young. Silco takes Powder under his wing and becomes her sort of surrogate father figure, and their relationship is quite it's strange, you know, and it's a grooming dynamic, you know. It's one where Silco uses her, and Jinx also, you know, Jinx is able to exist under the protection of Silco as she believes that her sister has abandoned her. So that's what the first few episodes show us in Act 1. We also get the storyline of these 2 young innovators and scientists coming across and discovering or creating hex tech, which becomes a really crucial aspect of the show. And Jace is a Piltover guy, another like light features like Vance. Is that his fucking name? I really hope that's his name. His character design is kind of light colored, and he's just like a hearty, good looking guy. And he is sponsored by the Kiramman family. The Kiramman family being an important figure on the council, Councilwoman Kiramman. Councilwoman Kiramman's daughter, Caitlyn, is an enforcer, so she's a cop, and Caitlyn is Vi's love interest. That gets presented in season 1 as well. So Jace is sponsored by the Kiramman family, and his partner, Viktor, who like prevents him from killing himself within the first couple episodes. Viktor is a kid from the Undercity, and he is disabled specifically by the environmental racism and the environmental impact of the relationship between Piltover and Zaun. And so they basically come together to innovate this sort of technology that can potentially bring, bridge the divide between Piltover and Zaun, which is part of Viktor's impetus in creating and innovating and developing this technology, trying to help the place where he comes from. So that's Act 1 of Season 1. Act 2 is when Violet is older, and Violet is in prison. Caitlyn is like, lets her out of prison, and the two of them end up going to Zaun, and there's a great scene where they're like jumping down from Piltover into the Undercity, and Kiramman is like, Caitlyn is like running after her, trying to keep up with Vi as she goes down, because Vi is like, her mindset is, where is Jinx and how can I help her? And she faces this sharp reality that Jinx has now basically taken up with Silco, who essentially helped murder their dad and their brothers. So Vi's like confused. So Vi and Caitlyn, they have like a kind of antagonistic relationship, because Vi is like, oh, you're just like some spoiled establishment rich girl. And as they're jumping down into the city, she's like, my little sister could have done this when she was 7. Like, what are you doing? Then we follow that alongside the Piltover narrative, where we see the sort of petty bourgeois politics of Jace and Viktor's technology as being implemented into Piltover's economy, and Jace gaining power within the council. The final act of season 1 is one where Violet reconnects with her younger sister Powder, but Powder has now renamed herself Jinx. They have a really fraught reunion, because Jinx is like, what the fuck are you doing with an enforcer? Like, the enforcers that like killed our family, the enforcers that have oppressed our people for decades, like for our whole lives, like, what are you doing with her? Who is she? And so we see how Jinx is sort of torn between Silco, her loyalty to Silco, and then her loyalty to Violet, to her sister Violet. And her sister Violet is really tied to her younger self, her sense of her Powder identity that she totally abandons or seeks to abandon. And we see how Vi is really torn between Caitlyn and the world of Piltover and her sister, her relationship to Jinx. Jinx and Caitlyn's relationship in season 1 is so central to every aspect of the dynamics here, and also in the Piltover storyline by Act 3, we see how Jace and Viktor have to part ways, because Jace has become pretty thoroughly enmeshed into the politics side of it all, and Viktor is seeing the devastating impact of their technology, because now it's being used as weapons of war. This season really presents to us some ideas about technology and the development of technology as something that the powerful use to oppress and to annihilate others with, the machinery of war. And Viktor never wanted his developments to go into that, so he sort of has to, he insists to Jace that we have to destroy Hextech, but Jace is like, no, what do you mean, we're doing so much good? And Viktor's like, peace out, I'm going back to Zaun, I can't deal with this shit. So yeah, and then it all culminates in the final episode where Jinx basically carries out a terror attack in the emotional turmoil of like choosing between playing Russian roulette, choosing between her loyalties to Silco and to Violet, and she ends up using Hex Tech and her own engineering skills. Like she's very much someone who is able to create her own weaponry and bombs and technology, just like with the scraps of what she can find in Zaun. And she creates she does a terrorist attack on Piltover, and specifically blowing up the councilman's room. And also throughout season 1, we get different side characters who play crucial roles in the world building and in the character dynamics and relationships that are present here. Everyone from the side character Ekko and the Firelights as a sort of resistance group within Zaun, and Mel Medarda as another figure on the council, and her mother from another nation, the nation where Mel originally hails from, her entering onto the political scene. It was an explosive ending in a very serious way, and so when season 2 finally came out, I was really curious to see what the show was going to do with all these different storylines, right? The themes of violence and destruction and reactive violence against oppression, the class dynamics and the sort of two warring cities adjacent to each other, this political reality, all tied up with how we understand like love and loyalty and whom we owe these things to, because that's at the crux of Violet, Viktor, Jace, Mel, and of course Jinx, all of their storylines. I think what makes this show super unsatisfying to me, I mean, at least season 2, as like a lesbian viewer as well, is the way that the Caitlyn and Vi storyline comes together. So in season 1, I found their relationship to be compelling because it was one where Caitlyn was forced to be pulled down into the Undercity with Violet and experience all this shit firsthand in Violet's like home environment. You know, she's fresh out of prison, she's seeing all these people again, and she's trying to find her sister, her baby sister. There's an amazing scene in season 1 where they end up going to a brothel for Vi to find information. There's a really like sexually charged scene there, and it's wonderful. But then in season 2, when their chemistry gets like consummated, it's strange, because integral to the dynamic between Cait and Vi is the tension of like Jinx existing in the background. First of all, Jinx kills Caitlyn's mother in the terrorist attack, and Mel and Jay survive because Mel has this sort of magical power that she's not really aware of, and we get a lot of screen time dedicated to that and her relationship with the Black Rose in season 2, which I found was not unnecessary, but rather there was so much screen time and like so much of the story was dedicated to telling that, and so much focus on the petty bourgeois politics of Piltover that we sort of abandoned Zaun and the conditions that led Zaunites to want to bomb the fuck out of Piltover in the first place, right? Because after Jinx carries out this terrorist attack, she is hailed as like a savior and a hero, and the people of Zaun sort of emblemize her as like a symbol of resistance. She is very like indifferent towards that. She's like, I don't know about that, like this is kind of a joke. And we see how Jinx sinks more and more into herself in season 2, where she feels that she no longer has any ability to be redeemed. She feels that she has made so many mistakes that she's just not worth it anymore. And Vi, initially within season 2, kind of also believes that as well. And I think that season 2, when we see how, and I think the writers themselves of the show have said this, they really didn't know what to do with the character of Violet in season 2. It's so apparent because Vi, like, totally abandons her principles and becomes like a full-on class traitor in such a serious way where she joins Caitlyn as an enforcer and it like invades Piltover looking for Jinx. enacting more chemical warfare, you know, the same like chemical warfare and environmental toxin runoff that has created the terrible conditions of Zaun in the first place. It's astounding, really. Like, I was just like, there is no way. This girl, this woman who has lived her whole life and been locked up by enforcers, who has seen her family be destroyed and her community destroyed by enforcers, and who had so much disdain for the Pilties in season 1, is going to now join them, like, to enact like absolute destruction in the search of her sister. Part of what the show does is it presents to us how individuals having emotional reactions to relationships in their lives as they change and evolve and become antagonistic or develop into something more can shape that person's like political actions. That seems to be a real through line with everything that is going on, from the way that Mel influences Jace to how Violet and Jinx at different turns turn their backs on each other and the consequences that they have. You know, Jinx does the terror attack, blasts the fuck out of the Piltover councilman room. Violet sort of turning on her sister, right? That is such an individualistic way of presenting how politics operate, you know? It becomes so removed between the ways that the material conditions that shape you as a person and what motivates you into something so like interpersonal and individualistic that feels, I guess, human to the viewer, but feels inconsistent with the potential politics of the show and makes them sort of incoherent. And I think the amount of screen time that Piltover itself and the petty bourgeois politics that are occurring in Piltover in the aftermath of this destruction brought on by Jinx, the amount of screen time we get to that and the way that the storyline really abandons Zaun, like, shows how the show itself aligns itself with a particular class interest, which is so like unsatisfying within the narrative, truly. And it makes the CaitVi relationship like so uninteresting. Part of what was great about the chemistry in season 1 was the fact that they came from such different worlds. But in season 2, Vi just kind of becomes enveloped into Caitlyn's world because she's like on their side now. That is so inconsistent with how Violet is shown to us in season 1 and the care and the love she has for the people of Zaun. And I think the way that she sort of turns class traitor in this way, whereas her sister is seen as a hero of Zaun, is so interesting because it is a reversal of the way that Vi had this sort of like hero complex, like I need to save my sister thing in the first season, and Jinx was like, I'm just a fuck up, I ruin everything that I touch. You know, it's an interesting inverse there. I cannot stand the fact that Cait is a cop and Vi becomes a cop. Like, this is a cop, initially it's a cop outlaw relationship or dynamic in season 1, and then in season 2 it becomes like they're both cops, I guess. It's wild to me. Like, it's so inconsistent with Violet as a character from Zaun when we see all the other characters from Zaun know where their loyalties lie eventually. She totally abandons any principles and values in her past for what? A girl like this cop? Like, huh? It is strange, and I hate the fact that what passes as lesbian representation and what we are supposed to, and many people do, like, really eat up is just the mere fact of representation and its presentation on screen and in stories without any real interrogation of like the politics of the story itself and what it's saying about the world and the implications that they have more broadly of like, what does it mean for every butch lesbian we see on screen to be a fucking cop. Vi is like a working class girl who has suffered immense trauma from the oppression of Piltover and from enforcers specifically. So to be a class traitor in that way, like, it's not unheard of, but it's quite unsatisfying as a viewer. She never comes to terms with that either within the show. There is no moment for her where there is moments where she's like, oh, like, my sister can actually be redeemed. She can actually be good. But it's no more nuanced than that. All right. And I found Jinx's character in season 1 to be so frustrating. But then in season 2, like, I felt so much like love for her. Part of the abandoning of Zaun and the way that it gets so little screen time and storyline, whereas we get so much screen time on Piltover mourning, like the loss of these different council members, and Caitlyn mourning her mother. Like, a whole episode is basically dedicated to that, and I'm like, that's crazy, because not only have Vi and Jinx's parents both died at the hands of Piltover oppression, like, directly. It was so frustrating to me to see the amount of focus that Caitlyn as a character and her ruthlessness and the sort of genocidal maniac she becomes after her mother dies is the focus of season 2 at the beginning, because it's like Violet and Jinx's parents have also been fucking annihilated by Piltover's oppression, by enforcers. Like, the fact that Cait is seen as justified in her actions, and the show sort of kind of presents it as such, or at least more sympathetic than Jinx's reaction, because Jinx's reaction, like, both of their reactions being so personal as that. But I mean, back to the whole point of how Vi being a butch lesbian and Vi and Caitlyn's like lesbian relationship being seen as like, oh wow, like, this is so amazing. I'm like, no, it's not, because they're both cops. I find that lesbian relationship super unsatisfying, not only unsatisfying but also uninteresting. Since season 1, I was always like, I don't understand why everyone is so obsessed with this couple. Like, Caitlyn is a cop. Like, Cait, not only is she a cop, she's also basically like a princess, family lineage as tied to Piltover's like power structure as it is. Like, she is the bourgeoisie and she chose to like be a cop. Like, that's a terrible person, I fear. And then season 2 is also unsatisfying in how the Jace Viktor storyline evolves. First of all, I think that it's kind of astonishing how the Jace Viktor storyline is never explicitly coded as romantic or sexual, but Vi and Caitlyn's is, like, from the very beginning into the end. Like, when Jace and Viktor as like partners in science, and then splitting paths and then be coming together at the end, it feels like it's almost fan fiction-y itself in the storyline, but it never really gets there. He's like a brother to me. I mean, it's interesting that they made that decision, that there's such an explicit lesbianism here, but not necessarily like, they don't let them be gay, I guess. I don't know. I mean, there's the Jace Mel storyline, there's like Viktor and like Skylar. And I think Viktor's surrender to this like Jesus figure of the hex tech and that going into the hex core and tapping into the arcane, and his like ascension to basically godhood and the destruction that he brings forth is also a total abandonment of what we understand from season 1 to be his character motivations, which is to help people in Zaun, not destroy the whole fucking world. He changes from this sort of materialist, like, scientific innovator who is, you know, an underdog fighting his way to the top, and then abandoning his position with all the power and glory that it comes with because it no longer aligns with his values, to becoming a figure of like destruction for the whole world for some sort of metaphysical aspect of the arcane. Like, it feels untrue, it feels inconsistent, and the fact that Jace is the one who has to like stop him or whatever, like stop Viktor from doing this, and how in every lifetime again and again it's only Jace who is able to do this. Like, that's super like romantic, first of all, but second of all, like, Jace becoming this hero of the story and then Ekko also becoming the hero of the story is so interesting to me because it feels like such a cop-out to make Jace this heroic figure, and it also feels like Ekko didn't get enough time in season 1 for how crucial the role he plays in season 2 to be. His relationship to Jinx, like slash Powder, is so I wish we got more of that, truly. And I think there's one of the best episode of season 2, to be honest, is the one where there's the time bending aspect. Sorry. That's me being allergic to lesbian cops. I think episode 7 is where we go back into another timeline and we see Ekko enter a timeline where Powder stays Powder, Vance is alive, and it's in fact Violet who has died, and all, her siblings, her brothers are alive, her mother's still alive, Silco and Vance are friends again. Like, it's a really idyllic world of the Undercity where Ekko is like, wow, I didn't think that the Undercity could ever look like this. It's such a beautiful episode, and of course Ekko has to exit this thread of time in order for him to like save the world or whatever. This is the only glimpse we get of the struggle that's going on in Zaun in like a real way, the sort of redemptive arc that it gets, which isn't even it. It's just like glimpse into it, whereas Piltover, it becomes redeemed. Like, there's like the Progress Day parade. There's all this stuff focusing in on the tragedy of this place and then how everyone has to team together to fight against another big bad, the Madar does. I'm like, guys, like, what happened to the class politics of Zaun and Piltover as warring cities? Now that we have this third big bad coming onto the shores, now we have to like team up together, and like the Undercity people are gonna put on the Piltover, they're gonna work alongside the enforcers to defend their cities. And mind you, the like third warring party that comes up onto the shores is using like Viktor's powers as well. Viktor from the Undercity? Total incoherency, really, with the class politics of this show. It's a very centrist, like liberal approach. We all just forgave each other for our violence and came together to defeat a common enemy. I'm like, did we forget about the environmental racism? Did we forget about what made Viktor who he was? What made Powder who she was? And Jinx who she became? And Silco who they became? It was the oppression of the Undercity by Piltover and the lack of resources that the Undercity got. And no one in Piltover really ever gets down to the Zaunite level and stays there of like understanding the humanity of these people. That never really occurs, and it's atrocious. It's atrocious because this is really a story of two sisters and then the politics of the world around them, bringing them together and breaking them apart, The question of, can love overcome all division in class, ability, morality, that seems to be like a really major theme and question of the show. And the show seems to give us the answer of like, yes, as long as it's the upper class or able-bodied or white masculinist person in that dynamic who then gets a glimpse of the other person's reality, is then able to operate as their savior. Like, that seems to be the politics of the show. Also, like, the way that when Jace and Viktor come back together in, like, the Arcane or whatever, Jace is like, you don't have imperfections, like, you're good the way you are. I'm like, okay, the way that Jace is speaking to him at the end in this way is crazy, because we're ignoring the fact that Viktor's experiences being sick and crippled and the driving force of his pursuit for like perfection is like, we're ignoring the fact that this is because of the injustice of class society, the havoc that environmental racism from Piltover has wreaked on him and other Zaunites like bodies in a very physical, material way. That's how we got here. Not the, oh, like, you're perfect the way you are. Like, come on. There just like wasn't enough time in season 2. Like, so much got cut, so much got condensed. We spent too much time on shit that really I did not care that much about. and that like the show was kind of forcing me to try to care about because it was trying to distract me from the fact that they were abandoning its themes. Even that episode of that other alternative reality we get feels super emotionally manipulative and exploitative of the viewer from the show's part, because it doesn't give us any reasoning as to why that version of Zaun looks like that. It just gets us this glimpse of like potential happiness. I'm like, hello, like material conditions, where, world building. Also, like, we get everyone's backstory but Ekko's. Huh? I don't fuck with that. I don't like that at all. Oh my god. His name is not Vance. His name is Vander. It's because I got confused with Vance, like Jace, Vander, and then I got to Vance. The final scene of season 1 is of the monster that is then revealed to be Vander as like a revived, monstrous creature that was, created by this exiled Undercity scientist who helped Viktor develop his abilities. That is another example of what I think season 1 potentially brought forth, which is the way that technology and advancements, I haven't even gotten to the shimmer stuff, like the way that technological advancements and advancements in things like magic, because magic and technology kind of operate as one and the same in this world. And honestly, I would say like in like a lot of world building in general, ways of manipulating reality, magic and tech kind of operate similarly in that way. They're one and the same ultimately. Force of engineered destruction through scientific development is present in how Vander is constructed into this like gruesome animal. The way that hex tech becomes this thing that just like needs to be destroyed after it's been developed. The show just so quickly cheapens and abandons the values of these character traits from Zaun in a way that doesn't serve the narrative well. In terms of the animation style and the art, I think it's very beautifully done, and I think it's really engaging. It's one of the most engaging aspects of the show in both season 1 and season 2. But I think it still does fail artistically in a variety of ways. It's like Harry Potterified, right? Where like the world building in these characters are so distinctive and so easily attachable and so expansive within the universe that people are really overlooking the aggressively centrist and liberal politics of the show that are fundamentally, or of that piece of media, they're fundamentally like super regressive. And it also, like, because it operates in this sort of self-insertive manner of the storytelling, it feels like a nerdy version of, or a nerdier version, I think, of like the Marvel smugness of characters, but like for girls, I guess. Like, and also like the show never fully explains the multiverse aspect and the world building here when it's so literal about the Undercity. Like, Zaun is literally called the Undercity. Like, it is so clearly the oppressed city in this dynamic. Like, it's so obvious in some ways, but attempts to be subtle in others that like feels just so unsatisfying. I think like major theme in media in general right now, contemporarily, from Succession to The White Lotus, etc., is to like the Hunger Games revival. That concept of class oppression, violence, and war, or just the mundanities and the petty violences between members of the bourgeois class, these are themes that people are really engaged with and concerned with right now. It's like always so unsatisfying, I feel, for the same reasons that Mark Fisher's analysis of like the movie The Children of Men also kind of operates as such in capitalist realism. And at the end of the day, what all these things do is that it's still ultimately, all these pieces of media, they still are very much invested in the portrayal of these mechanisms and dynamics of power, the pettiness of the ruling class, their utter lust and thirst for destructiveness, like interpersonally and externally in general, and internally, like, has such massive consequences for the rest of the world. But it's less concerned with those consequences for the rest of the world, like, because it's caught up in portraying that thing. And ultimately, like, this is just like a show from a video game production company that had like a huge budget, and it's a Netflix exec approved, very profitable show. Like, of course it's going to have these sort of things tied into it, but it's still, that doesn't make it any less unsatisfying for me as a viewer. To read some notes for me from my iPad directly, all of these underclass characters suffer these terrible tragedies, and also the tragedy of their storylines constantly getting these downturns only to be saved by these upper class characters, like with Jace and Viktor, or with Cait and Vi, Heimendinger and like Ekko. And to some degree, it is reflective of reality, right? It's true that, like, in the capitalist hellscape that we live in, it's not a world that's kind to poor people. It's not a world that's kind to oppressed people. It beats people down as much as possible. And it also creates a circumstance where they exist at the behest of the charity of those blessed into the divine existence of being born into the right part of town or the right family. But, like, it's just impossible to sell that you're telling a story of like working class heroism and resistance in the face of this immense oppression when your story itself continually oppresses those characters who receive no redemption or grace compared to their bourgeois and collaborator like character foils. Those are ultimately my problems with this show. And I think, like, my other theory as to why the Jace-Viktor relationship isn't, like, consummated versus the sex scene in the dungeon with Cait and Vi right after Jinx escapes from prison, or like fucking Vi lets her out. Bruh, that's crazy. I mean, I understand what they're doing here with the triangulation of like, okay, whose loyalties are there. But girl, I can't take that shit seriously at all, you know? I think the reason why the lesbian storyline went along and not the gay guys doing a gay relationship is probably because the audience of the show, coming from like Riot Games and from a video game, like video games are very like male dominated, and League of Legends I think in particular as well, they probably don't want to see like they're like okay, I guess, with like women, even if one of them is butch, like being together, but not the macho man and the other man. I guess. I think like they were more hesitant about the whole gay storyline versus the lesbian one, probably with the idea of that audience in mind, I imagine. And also because with how underdeveloped and unsatisfying the thematic content of what a CaitVi relationship could look like, if Jace and Viktor were like romantically entangled in this way that wasn't just like being tied together in every universe and in every world or whatever, it would have also suffered the same folly of the underclass character becoming a traitor to themselves and their values and existing at the behest of the other person, which is what does kind of happen when Jace has to like save Viktor from himself and from destroying the world or whatever, when it was Jace who insisted on continuing to develop Hextech in the first season and Viktor who walked away from it. Anyway, I think that the show it's still a good show, you know, like especially I think season 1 will always have a really a real place in my heart, but season 2 is just such a disappointment. I don't think I can watch that season again without getting mad. Like every gay person, every queer person I've talked to about this show who has watched it has also found it unsatisfying for both the like LGBT representation aspect of like, okay, representation, but at what cost? And also, what is it actually saying in the show? Like, oh, it's beautiful animation and artistically super innovative and uses all this imagery of like resistance or rebellious, like everything from the graffiti art to the way that the frames are, you know, numbered and shot, like all that is there. The attention to detail in the animation and the world building of these characters is there, but like, what about the storyline? What about the dialogue? The dialogue feels so stilted, especially in season 2. Like when I go back and look at season 1 scenes, I'm like, oh yeah, actually the dialogue here isn't that great either. Like a lot of these characters talk very similarly to each other, I guess. But it's the voice acting that allows the show for these characters to still sound distinctive, like have their own voices. But I think like the general corniness and vagueness of some of the dialogue is still ultimately there, but it's especially apparent in season 2. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Arcane. These were not very well organized thoughts, obviously, and I'm sure I repeated myself a lot. So you don't have to tell me that in the comments. I promise. I know. And I could have organized this better by like writing a script and creating a bullet pointed list at the very least and whatnot, but that's not really that's not my tea. That's not really my business here. I'm not really a video essayist. I mostly come on here to talk about books and occasionally other media and like my life in general. So I hope you enjoyed watching me listening to me complain about this fucking stupid ass animated show for like 45 minutes or whatever. And please let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts regarding my thoughts on the show. And if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, I'm just curious to know how you think of the show now that season 2 has been out and that you can view it from this lens of looking back on it as a whole, like body of work and an entire storyline. Did you also find it unsatisfying? Am I the only one? Or are you a gay person who watched the show and was like, I don't know about all that? Please let me know. I really appreciate you watching this video all the way through. If you have gotten to this part of the video, please comment down below. Comment a green heart, because I have like a green thing going on today a little bit. Also, this is, I guess, sort of fitting, although I do find the real world fantasy storyline comparison things kind of corny and insufficient and kind of minimizing very often, but that's, you know. From Ferguson to Palestine, resistance is not a crime, and racism now. That's what my t-shirt says. And if you do want to support a Palestinian in Gaza right now, suffering from the continual bombing and the restriction on basic things like water and food, please donate to one of my friends, Shahid. I will have the link down below. It would really mean the world to me. And yeah, but that's all I have for you. Thanks again for watching, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. All right, bye.